Hello, if you're just joining us, this is our very first ever Facebook Live event, and we are going to be talking about health. My name is Victor Ayara, and of course, good health is of paramount importance to everyone, except you are just one of those who likes to fall ill. I am yet to meet that kind of person. And so, without further ado, I just want to let you know that this event is brought to you by the 10,000 Family Study of the University of Minnesota. And you might be wondering, what is that about? Don't worry about it. We will talk about that. And of course, my guest is going to shed more light on what the study is about and how you can get involved. And of course, a lot of people probably would be thinking, going by the name of this program, the title of the program, what is worse, grandma's cake recipe or her genes? And if you're just wondering, like so many other people, we're not talking cake recipes. We have nothing to do with culinary arts today. We're talking about health. And to discuss this topic and give it the due attention, and of course give you all the information that you probably are looking to get from this program, I have my guest, who is Dr. Logan Spector. Logan Spector is an epidemiologist who mainly studies the causes of childhood cancer with a focus on childhood leukemia, bone sarcomas, and hepatoblastoma. Yeah, that's a name. That's quite a big one. I'm going to say it again: hepatoblastoma.
That's pretty good.
Yep, that's okay. And he also studies long-term outcomes for children who were operated for congenital heart disease. He is the principal investigator for the 10,000 Families Study, which is building a study of Minnesota families whose health will be studied over time. In all of his work, Dr. Spector uses both classical and genetic epidemiologic approaches. Dr. Spencer obtained his PhD at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, where he had his dissertation work in conjunction with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Since 2002, he has been at the University of Minnesota, where he now heads the Division of Epidemiology and Clinical Research in the Department of Pediatrics. When he isn't working, Dr. Spector prefers to be called Logan, which is what I'm going to call him today for the sake of this interview. He also enjoys spending time with his family, riding bikes and kayaking. And I also say that Dr. Spector has also been a radio DJ in his days in college. Thank you so much. That's the very fun part. So I had to save the best for last. Thank you
My
so much for
pleasure.
joining me, Logan.
Yeah, thank you for interviewing me.
Thank you so much. And before, I know that I've read your credentials here, but I would like to ask you, what drew you to this line of work? What drew you? What was the attraction to study epidemiology?
Well, I actually knew from at least high school that I wanted to be a scientist.
Okay.
And in college, I studied biology, and they make you study fruit flies in a lab. And I found that I really didn't like working with flies, and I especially didn't like getting up at 6 a.m. on a fly schedule to work with them. And lastly, I saw the fly research is pretty distant from anything that was going to help a person. I know now, of course, that the kind of research, basic research that you do in flies and other test organisms can help people, but it felt pretty distant to me. Epidemiology is really the study of disease and health in populations of people. So to me, it was a way to use science in a large way to study public health.
All right. So talking about sciences, I would not even try to say that I'm a scientist or ever really have been that kind of person that loves sciences. And the fact that you studied epidemiology makes you more than qualified to talk about this subject, and especially because you are the principal researcher or investigator. Can you tell us why it is important for us? When I say us, I mean everyone, those of us who are watching, and of course, why is it important that we talk about sciences, how they relate to health, and how it, especially in the era that we're in with everything happening, why is it so important that people dedicate their time to this line of work?
Well, I'm not stumping for my own job, but I think we should also talk about why it's important that people participate in science. I mean, look, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and here in Minneapolis, we're also having some major debates around how society is structured. And you really to come to answers about COVID or structural racism or anything, you have to look at what the truth is. And that's what science is. It's a truth finding machine. And so, that's why I think science is important. That's why I think it's important that people participate in science.
And just talking about participation, wherever you are watching this broadcast from, I would like to at least advise that you are able to be part of it. It's going to be an interactive session, so it's not just me and Logan. You can leave a message, you can leave a comment, you can ask a question, and we would get to that in the course of the interview. I just want to let you know that we value your participation, and it means a lot to us that you could have been doing any other thing, but you chose to be part of this program. And please do not forget to give us your feedback. And we would also at some point be scrolling the website where you can get additional information. But I'm not asking you to do that right now. For now, we just need you here with myself and Logan. Can you tell how does a scientist like you decide what affects the health of one person versus another? Can you give us examples and different factors?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how people in my branch of science study it. There are many different branches of science that tell us different things. In people, in populations of people, you have three different ways basically of studying disease. Okay, we probably most of your audience has heard about a randomized trial. Okay, so you take a group of people, you flip a coin to decide whether they will get a drug or not to treat a disease, and then you measure their outcomes over time, their survival, or whether their symptoms got better. You can also kind of flip it, take a group of people who don't have the disease and randomize them to get, say, vitamins or not. Follow them over time and see who develops disease less. And then we would be testing preventive factors. But, we can't randomize everything in the world. It's not ethical to randomize, say, smoking because we already know that it has so many bad effects. So we have to study it observationally. That means that we determine their exposure and then we follow them over time to see who develops disease. All right. And then lastly, we have case control studies that we deploy when we have very rare diseases. Okay, so I study some pediatric cancers that affect 150 kids a year in the United States. And in order to do a cohort study of that, we would have to enroll every child born in the US for a period of years and follow them up to see which 150 got the disease. That's not practical. So in a case control study, we do the reverse. We take the kids with cancer, we take a carefully selected group of kids without cancer, and we ask them about their past exposures. And so those are the three basic study designs we use. I guess I'll just end it there saying it's a lot more complicated than that.
Oh, thank you so much, Logan. And yes, and so that brings us to the 10,000 family studies. I mean, first, I would ask you two questions, at least for the benefit of our viewers from all over the world. Why do we have the 10,000 in the name, 10,000 family studies? And that's one. And secondly, what this study is all about in a nutshell.
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, this study is based in the state of Minnesota, and for those who may be listening in other continents, you've probably heard of Minnesota, in the last couple of weeks. But our motto is "Land of 10,000 Lakes." It's on every license plate on every car in the state. Um, and the number 10,000 sort of resonates with Minnesotans. Um, Also, when you do a study of health, the size of the study determines the rarity of the health problem you can study. Okay, so um, you need say 100,000 people to look at uncommon cancers, because out of that 100,000 people, maybe 100 or 200 will develop that cancer. So it turns out that 10,000 families will result in 100,000 or more people, and that will give us the sample size that allows us to look at uh, relatively rare health outcomes. The reason that we are studying families is to fill in some of the gaps that prior studies have had. I mean, we're certainly not the first cohort study. They have been out there a lot, but sometimes they're very specialized populations, like the nurses' health study has been running for decades, but it's just of nurses who obviously have skewed female in the past, and also are have to go through nursing school, so they're all very educated. Also, a lot of cohorts start at age 50 or 60 because of the pressure from the NIH or whoever's funding them. They want to see disease outcomes in the near future. But we already know that a lot of what determines health starts in early life, um, starting at conception with the DNA that you're given. In utero events also play out for the rest of your life, and um, how much you exercise or eat during puberty also plays a role. And so we've been trying to build this cohort that will actually capture some of the people very early and follow them for a very long time. We call that life course epidemiology. And not a lot of studies have tried to do it because they're always thinking about the short term payoff. We're trying very hard to think about the long term legacy. Lastly, people, most people are not individuals that have no family. Most of us are embedded in a family that gives us both, can give us our DNA, but also our health habits. They live in the same area and so can have the same environmental exposures. There really hasn't been a cohort study of families to date. So these are the reasons that we formed it as 10,000 families. And then lastly, I'd say Minnesotans, people who live here, tend to stay in the state more so than other states. And so we knew that it was a good place to try and track people over time, because chances are they're still going to be in the same town 20, 30 years from now.
Thank you so much for giving us a background as to why the 10,000 in the name, and of course, the reason why this study is important. So some experts, health experts, say that most people's health is caused by social determinants of health, such as housings, neighborhoods, access to education, jobs, and other opportunities and relationships. What's your opinion, and why?
Um, I would say that we know a lot about what is caused by health from the last 100 years, what causes health or disease from the last 100 years, and making a blanket statement about all of health is very difficult. It's going to be more about individual diseases, and without a doubt, there is social influence on much of disease. But we also know that that genes play a role, and the amount varies depending on what disease or what trait we're talking about. Um, so here at Minnesota, actually in psychology, there's a long history of doing twin studies. So that has been in the past how we've measured heritability. So identical twins, of course, share 100% of their genes. Um, Fraternal twins have a normal sibling relationship. They are 50% related genetically on average. And so if you measure a disease in identical twins and fraternal twins, or if you measure a trait like height, you can do some pretty simple mathematics to estimate how much of that disease or trait was due to shared genes versus environment. Now, that study design is not perfect because, of course, twins, whether they're fraternal or identical, always share the in utero environment. So if there was an insult to the babies in utero, they both would be affected by it. But I absolutely don't believe in what we would call genetic determinism, meaning that genes are everything. That's true in a small number of cases. If you have a genetic mutation that wrecks the cell's machineries, that's going to cause a disease, um, almost certainly. Um, if you have, in most cases, though, um, you have some range within the genetics. So rather than being a destiny, it's more like bounds around what your health might be.
All right, thank you so much, Logan, for taking the time to answer that question. And I'm still going to come back to it because, of course, that's the very title of our talk today. How much of genetics? How much does genetics affect our health? Now, we you have mentioned that it's not the only determinant, but to what extent should we be worried if we have something in our family? Sometimes they say, oh, we have asthma in our family, we have heart disease in our family, we have high blood pressure. How much should somebody who is coming from such a family or with such genetical structures in their family, how much should they be worried about it?
That's a great question. Um, uh, First of all, it depends very much on the circumstances in the family. In cancer, um, if a grandmother gets breast cancer in her 70s, that's sad to say, a normal occurrence or a usual occurrence, and it doesn't really signal that there's some sort of genetic predisposition. For women who get breast cancer under 40, that is definitely a worrisome occurrence. That means that she may have what I call a bad news gene, and it means that the family may need to get tested as well. I think this is a good time to talk about the different kinds of genes. Really, there are bad news genes. These are mutations in genes. Everybody has the gene, but most people have a functional copy. Some small number of people have bad copies that can cause disease. When we see signs like that, the person should get tested for the gene and possibly their relatives as well. The other kind of gene is, I use the analogy of a slot machine. Only the slot machine might have 40 or 100 or 500 little windows, and when you pull the lever, at conception, most people are going to get 50 out of 100 lemons and 50 out of 100 red cherries. And but some unlucky people are going to get all lemons out of the 100 slots, and those people may have a risk that is just like somebody who has one bad news gene. But when risk is spread around lots of genes with little contribution, families don't have the same kind of pattern of occurrence than when they have the bad news genes. So this is a long way of saying you should be worried and you should seek care or possibly genetic counseling if your family is having young onset, quite a bit less so if the onset is later.
All right. I want to thank you so much for answering that question so eloquently. The other thing is that, of course, we are going to talk about who can participate in this study because, of course, the main reason that people need to take this seriously is, of course, health, like they say, is wealth. There are people who are coming from certain backgrounds who probably, especially, I would say, the immigrant communities in the Minnesota area, uh, they are coming from backgrounds that don't necessarily have this kind of history or family health history. And how is this study going to benefit such people, especially if they are coming from places where nobody really kept track on what has been a pattern in their health or disease?
So, family history is actually not that well recorded in the medical records. Anybody who's been to the doctor in the U.S. knows they might ask, "What did your family have?" But they rarely pry into it. In fact, we know that family histories are notoriously involved to get, and physicians just don't have time. Um, that said, for common diseases like heart attacks or cancer, it may be bad or poorly assessed. For rare diseases, rare cancers, rare conditions, those tend to spark something in the physician's mind. So it's not a problem if somebody doesn't have uh, a, a good family history, or sorry, an accurate family history to convey. Um, those of us doing research will inquire about it in more depth than a physician would. I would also add that we plan to study DNA directly, and some of that family history is written directly into the DNA. So if we're looking at parents and children, we can see who passed on a gene mutation. We can see whether gene mutations appeared in a child that the parent didn't give them, and in fact, every generation there are new mutations that appear. And then finally, you asked, for populations that may not have participated in this kind of research before, well, what is in it for them? I'll start by saying that the 10,000 families is really about the future of Minnesota, which is much more diverse than its past. And we wish to conduct health research in a cohort that resembles the future of Minnesota. Also, we know that all the genetic research conducted to date, over 80 or 85% of it, has been in people of European descent. And while it's true that the genes that determine health overlap depending on who your ancestors were, they don't completely. And it's an absolute necessity that for the benefits of genetic research to extend to all populations to happen, we have to make sure that we are studying diverse populations. I would love to take a question from the public.
Absolutely. So we are, like I told you, hey, this is not just me and Logan talking. Yes, we're having a conversation. Yes, it is important that we have this conversation at this time. But I want to let you know that you are the most important reason why we're having this conversation. So your participation is much, much appreciated. Your questions should be directed to us via the comment section of the Facebook page, and we would do the best we can to take questions. And we're very ready. As Dr. Spector had said, we are ready to take your questions. Okay? And I am going to, if you have been following, our conversation, you would understand just the reason why this program is important. And of course, Logan is going to give us a little bit more details as to how, for those of you in the Minnesota area who are looking to be part of this fantastic research that the University of Minnesota is carrying on. So, Logan, I'm going to ask you this question that has to do with the details. Of course, people are watching, people are listening, they would like to know, what do they need to do and how do they become part of the 10,000 families, while we still wait on all of our viewers to at least leave us a question. And it's not every time that you have a seasoned researcher like Dr. Logan Spector on a Facebook Live event to actually answer your question. So please take advantage of this opportunity and let's do it together. So if you don't mind my asking, Logan, how do people who are interested in becoming part of this study, how do they get signed on?
Yeah, well, we're scrolling the our website down at the bottom periodically. It's 10kfs.umn.edu. That will outline how you do it. You also could send an email to our web address if you want to just talk about what it means. We realize that a family-wide, potentially long-term study is a big ask for a lot of people, and so we really want people to think hard about whether they want to participate. But we also want to get to 10,000 families, because it's only that way that we're going to have the power to study Minnesotans' health.
Thank you so much.
I do see a question.
Yes.
And
Oh.
Victor, I'm going to let you ask it since you're the professional.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question, but before I do so, it will be remiss of me not to mention that there is a $20 gift card. So you have to be on the show, you have to listen, and you have to participate for a chance to win a $20 gift card. And we're going to do a draw, and someone is going to get it. And so stick around, at least as an incentive to, apart from the overall benefit of getting to learn about health and genetics and the environment, then this is something that, of course, could you could be the winner. Who knows? So the question Logan wants me to ask, and of course, this has to do with environmental exposures and social influence. Logan, what do you mean by those? By environmental exposures, do you only mean things in the air, water, ground, or do you also mean neighborhood and opportunities where people live or grow up?
Great question. So we as epidemiologists tend to use environment kind of loosely when we're talking about things, but when it comes to doing the science, it usually means something a lot more specific. So um, when we're talking loosely, environment means everything that isn't genetic or innate, everything that's coming from outside the body to influence your cells or what's going on inside. But if we're talking about kind of categories of exposure, environment usually means uh, chemicals or pollution or things like that. If we were talking about, but we can also talk about the built environment, what your neighborhood looks like. Does it give opportunities um, for walking? Is it a peaceful environment, or is there concern about violence? Um, and then we also talk about behavioral or lifestyle factors. So smoking and diet. You know, diet is really taking the environment, food, and putting it into your body. Same with smoking. But that's how we generally classify the exposures. 10,000 families, we intend to study all of that, your environment, where you live, what the actual chemical or pollution exposures may be that your family is exposed to, what your family does as far as its health habits. And then, of course, I've already given away, we plan to look at DNA.
Okay, so I know you already talked about the genes and how those affect our chances of staying healthy or getting any of the diseases that are family members. I would try to. I would. This is a very personal one for me. I had a couple of my aunts from my mother's side who have unfortunately passed on due to breast cancer. And even though I am a guy, I worry how much of that information or that history should I, for instance, worry about for my family members. I'm talking about my nieces, my cousins, even my own daughter. How much of that should I really pay attention to, especially if it's something that I have seen happen in my family? And unfortunately, as it's a sad experience, that is something that I know that somebody out there could be thinking as well.
Um, I get it. They say the personal experience is very emotional. Um, you're obviously male. You lost aunts, but you have children. You may worry about the daughters. Actually, the breast cancer, there is a male version, and it is caused by the bad news gene. So it's not unusual to worry about that. And of course, if you have it, you could pass it on to your daughters.
Somebody is. I'm looking at Marisol Asher Doyle. Marisol, we're going to get your question now. It says, "I'm the only one. Um, I'm the only in my family who gets electricity shocks in the occipital. What could be the what could be the cause?" I want to believe that's what Marisol is trying to say. And he said, "Natural way to help with sacral pain." Okay, so Dr. Spector is going to answer that question for us.
Thank you, Marisol, for your belief in my ability to answer that question. But I think if your family's all getting sacral pain, oddly enough, my mother's a physical therapist, so I know what that is. That's a very common place to get pain. Not so much because it's transmitted familial, but for our species, standing upright leads to back pain. Um, So I think the cause of your back pain is being human and standing. But the whether electrical shocks for treatment of that is good or not, that's not something I'm able to say.
You, this is Diane Lazovic, and her question is, can you say more about how genes and habits work together to increase or decrease risk of disease?
Time,
How
Victor.
genes and habits work together.
Ah, very good question. So we'll take the easy case of smoking and lung cancer. Everybody, I hope most people know that smoking for a long time can lead to lung cancer. But of course, most people who smoke for a long time do not get cancer. And we have studies that have teased apart what are the genes that influence whether a smoker gets cancer. Some people think that kind of research opens up a can of worms because it would give license to people who have maybe a better gene profile to go ahead and smoke. But in any case, a lot of the genes that determine whether a smoker gets cancer have to do with how your body clears out those toxins. So, if you're what's called a fast metabolizer, your body encounters those toxins and disposes of them very quickly. Your body gets less exposure to them. If you're a slow metabolizer, then that means they stick around in your body much longer. And so, that's one of the ways that we've started to both understand how the exposure causes the disease and how individuals vary in their response to the exposure.
Thank you so much. And of course, if you're just joining us, it is Facebook Live events, the very first one regarding the 10,000 family study, which is conducted by the University of Minnesota. And the title for today is What is Worse, Grandma's Cake Recipe or Her Genes? And we have been fielding questions from viewers from all over the United States, and sometimes I also believe that there are people outside the United States who are watching us. I may be wrong. So we're taking more questions, and this one is coming from Marella Jo La Liberte. And she says, I am a research coordinator for Fayview, and we will be offering this study to our communities in rural Minnesota. How would this benefit the middle-aged participants directly whose family history is not clear or who no longer are around to gather their history?
Great question. So, this is not 10,000 families is not an interventional study. We're not offering any drugs or medications. We do ask that people take a physical examination. And so, if you don't have access to regular medical care, some of the tests that we do during the examination would certainly tell you if you have any health problems. The family history is not strictly necessary to join the study. Um, but aside from the benefit of examination, as well as when we look at your DNA, if we find something that would be cause for action, we would inform you and your physician of that. Um, the study is mostly, though, about helping your fellow man. So one other way that a middle-aged person would get benefit is the knowledge that they are doing something to help their neighbors, their state, and the rest of humanity.
Thank you very much, Logan. And of course, somebody's going to win a $20 gift card. Do not forget that $20 gift card is up for grabs as long as you participate. And we are going to determine the winner at the end of this broadcast. Marisol Asher Doyle, thank you so much. I see that you actually have asked other questions, and I'm going to convey this question, of course, to our expert, Dr. Logan Spector. Marisol had asked earlier, is arthritis hereditary? That is a question. Uh,
That's it's a good question, and I really want to thank Marisol for testing the limits of my knowledge. But arthritis, depending on the type, actually does have a very strong hereditary component. I know because my father has rheumatoid arthritis, and every morning I wake up trying to figure out if that stiffness I feel is just because I overextended myself the day before, or if maybe I'm starting to get the signs of it as well. It's a very strong familial component for arthritis, and it means that just like I'm personally doing, uh, thinking about that disease, monitoring myself for symptoms. If you have a family history, then you should bring it up with your physician, because you are at higher risk.
all right, Logan, thank you so much. And we want to thank all of our viewers who are giving us feedback. That's how we know that you're following, and we do really appreciate you. And one of those viewers is Kevin Wenge. I hope I got the name right. It's either Wenge or Wenge. Given the sometimes negative history of medical studies in communities of color, and he goes further to give examples of the Tuskegee, how can you build trust for this study in diverse communities? Thank you so much, Kevin. That's a very, very, very important question. Logan?
Yep, I agree. It's a wonderful question, and the first thing we've done is outreach to community organizations, that represent the interests of diverse communities. We have slowly, because we are just getting off the ground, started translations of our materials so that we can speak to people in their language. And then lastly, we've heard the message loud and clear, nothing about us without us. And so our plan as we grow is to hire diverse staff from the communities, who can, help build that trust, who can vouch for the procedures and the intent of the study. And then lastly, as we grow, we are going to build a council or a board that oversees our activities, and we'd make sure that it's populated with representatives from the diverse communities that we're asking to participate in the study.
All right, thank you very much. And we have another question from Monica Duke. Is it Duke or Duke? Would stress affect your health? And would the study look at mental health? And that was from Monica. Monica, apologies if I mispronounced your name, okay? But Logan, that's a question for Monica.
This is a wonderful question, and it is one of the reasons that we're studying life course epidemiology. There is a lot of information now about the negative effect on lifetime health for having had adverse childhood events. Adverse childhood events are, have very precise definition, but think physical or sexual or emotional abuse, um, financial shock, war, things like that. It turns out that having a number of those greatly affects your adult health. It increases the risk for addiction, for suicide. It also increases the risk for coronary heart disease. So these are things that we are interested in, although by the same token, these events make it more difficult to build trust with people because um, having adverse events in childhood makes people distrustful, and I can understand why. Um, as far as studying mental health, we have a very strong component looking at cognition, thinking that is, and especially its decline over time. So while we're not specifically set up to look at major psychiatric disorders, we do want to look at overall well-being, which includes assessments for depression and early signs of dementia.
Thank you so much, Logan. And if you're just joining us, it is the 10,000 family study uh, put together by the University of Minnesota. And this is our very first Facebook event. And we're trying to at least answer all of the questions that our viewers have sent us. And I would move further, I'll move straight to Nico Thompson, who is asking how many generations of each family are being recruited for this study, Logan?
Yes, great question. We are hoping to get, well, we require at least 2 generations from the same family. So that would be, thinking about the earliest generation would be kids, parents, and grandparents. That would mean we're going to require at least grandparents and parents, or parents and kids. But we would love to have 3 generation families, and we would also love to have siblings. So if you have 2 sisters and they both have kids, they could all be considered part of one family. The more people we can fill in within a family, the more that want to participate, the more valuable that family is for the science.
That was your question. Of course, how many generations of each family are being recruited for this study? So we can tell you that one generation qualifies, but we, of course, welcome more because it's an ongoing study. And Marila Jo Laliberte also asked, where would these physical examinations take place? Would there be appointed physicians in the rural areas, or would they need to travel to the metro, Logan?
Yes, so certainly in our beginning phase, we've just had most of our health fairs in the metro area, since people could travel to a central place in rather short time. We are partnering with University of Minnesota Extension, that has a presence in every county in the state, to try and set up health fairs in each county, or at least in a major area within each county. So our hope is that people will be able to get to one of these within a year of their get to one of these health fairs within a year of their joining the study. But to be clear, you can join the study with a questionnaire, and we are also working on sending kits so that you can do a little swish and spit, we call it, to gather DNA. The most important thing is to make your willingness known and start the process of joining. And I also wish to thank my staff for reminding us that at least 2 people within the same generation, so sisters or brothers, also could join 10,000 families. But again, we do encourage multiple generations.
All right, thank you very much. And just to clarify that one generation is enough. Okay, we have another question. How might 10,000 families and genetic research benefit healthcare and public health for communities? Can you give an example or two, Logan?
Absolutely. So one of the most common genetic diseases is called familial hypercholesterolemia. Um, you know, one of the tests I had when I was in grad school was being able to say that. In any case, somebody who has a high cholesterol under 30, the kind of cholesterol you might see in a 60 or 70-year-old, the probability that they have a mutation that caused that is quite high, and it can be treated. You treat them almost precisely like you would with somebody who has high cholesterol in their 60s or 70s, but you need to do it for much longer. But also, if somebody young has that, it means that their family needs to get tested as well. But that's not often done in practice. So with 10,000 families, for instance, we would find these families, we would test all of them, we would follow them over time to find out how much are their cardiovascular outcomes improved because of this early intervention.
Thank you very much, Logan. If you're just joining us, it is the 10,000 Family Study Facebook Live event. And I have been speaking with epidemiologist Dr. Logan Spector, who has been answering our questions. And of course, I see that those questions keep coming. We want to thank you profoundly for finding the time to join us. So do not forget also that there is a $20 gift card which is up for grabs. I don't know who the winner is going to be, but hey, it could be you. Shannon Sagan is asking the question, will the 10K family study continue to keep participants engaged with findings from their studies? If so, how, Dr. Spector?
Yes, well, absolutely. I think that while there is some small potential for direct personal benefit for participating in a study like this, namely the physical exams and the genetic scan, mostly it's about contributing to the body of knowledge in people. And so returning what we find to people is a very important principle. We are working on a newsletter that will be sent out periodically. I would want to talk to my staff to remember how often we plan on it. And then also we have a strong presence at the state fair, the Great Minnesota Get Together. Unfortunately, although probably prudently, it's not going to be held this year. But every other year, we're there and we'll invite people to come talk to us. And then lastly, we have a website, 10kfs.umn.edu, where we will be posting our research when it starts to roll out. But I want to manage expectations. We have to get larger and we have to actually get the money to do some of the extremely interesting cutting edge science before we'll have results to share with you.
All right, and we have another question, Logan. What do you recommend for interpreting health news since it is always changing and often seems pretty contradictory?
I'm going to own that one completely. As an epidemiologist, we're long known that the way we publicize our research, the way that the press takes that public, announcements and reports them is pretty bad for gaining the public's confidence. Um, you know, Within our field, we know that in order to say that X causes Y, you have to study it over a period of years. You have to study it in different contexts. Different people have to do the studies. You want to see consistency. But the way it's reported is this study found, that X did not cause Y, whereas the previous study said it did. You know, I give up. Um, I think that the way to do this is to seek out the meta studies, the studies that take everything around a question of causality and puts it all together to come up with a final conclusion. And if you're not adept at reading the scientific literature yourself, go to a trusted body, the American Cancer Society, the National Institutes of Health, and they will have done a reasonable job of pulling this kind of information together for you. Um, do not rely on the University of Google unless the University of Google takes you to these credible sources.
All right, talking about relying on the University of Google. I would tell you that a lot of a lot of times you find out people actually that is the first university that people attend, even though they don't graduate and there's no diploma at the end of the day. Um, so if you are just joining us, we welcome your comments and feedback. And of course, it's a 10,000 family study Facebook Live event. And we have another question here, which is very important, especially against the backdrop of the reports that we've seen in the news lately. The question that all our audience might be having on their minds at this point would be, why does COVID-19 have worse consequences for some people than for others? Is it because of their genes, their environment, something they do, or a combination of both, Logan?
Very topical and on a lot of people's minds. Here in Minnesota, several months ago, we saw an article about a man in his 30s who was a triathlete who nevertheless ended up in the hospital, maybe on a ventilator, I don't recall, with COVID. And you got to wonder, how is a man who's young, healthy, and fit beyond belief end up in the hospital with this disease? And stories like that make it clear that there has to be some genetic vulnerability in order for young healthy people to get COVID disease. We also know that comorbidities, diabetes, obesity, underlying heart disease raise the risk for COVID disease or bad outcomes. So, the answer is kind of all of the above. Some of it is the pre-existing conditions you had when you were exposed. For sure, there is inter-individual variation in susceptibility, and in fact, the first genome-wide study of vulnerability for COVID came out. It was in Spanish and Italian patients, and they confirmed an earlier observation in China just from medical records. People who have blood type A have a different risk. And then they found another gene. It wasn't in the ACE2 receptor, but it interacts with it. ACE2 is a protein on the surface of lung cells that is how the COVID virus gets into the body. And so, short answer is it is partly the DNA that determines it. It's partly your kind of health when you encounter it. And an unanswered question is whether the amount of virus that initially infects you could also determine your course of disease.
All right. Thank you so much, Logan, for that answer. And as we are getting towards the beginning of the end of this Facebook Live event, which of course I think I have learned a lot in the last couple of minutes than I have ever learned about health in a very, very long time. So, Logan, thanks to you for your very informative answers. Now, if you are still sticking around, do not forget that a $20 gift card is up for grabs, and I know that somebody is going to win it. The question is, who is that person? All right, and I see that also that team is also answering some of your questions. Thank you so much. Emily was working behind the scenes, of course, answering some of your questions. So I'm just going to ask you this, Logan, in your line of work, you have seen a lot of, people struggle with different kinds of health issues. If you were to have a magic wand, what disease would you cure first? And don't tell me COVID, because COVID is it's like it's something that's happening right now. But if you were to have a magic wand, what disease would you cure first?
Well, I wouldn't cure a disease. I would cure a cause for disease because prevention is worth an ounce of cure. Um, so I would probably wipe tobacco smoking off the face of the earth because it's the one thing people do that doesn't serve much purpose, but causes an incredible amount of misery. Um, and then I'd say after that, um, we have beaten back cancer and heart disease to a degree that I don't think anyone thought possible 50 years ago. And unfortunately, then that means people live long enough to get dementia. I've seen it in my family. Many people have seen it, and it's a way of losing your loved ones um, in a very painful way. And so, if we could wipe away dementia, Alzheimer's, I think, and give more life in the years than just years of life, that would be great.
And Mike, for this is going to be my final question to you. Um, what aspect of this work, of this study, are you most passionate about? And you can tell me why as well.
Well, I am passionate about the field of epidemiology in general. We really are the basic science of public health. And But for 10,000 families in particular, I am a transplant to Minnesota, but I've grown to love the state. Um, you know, and Its many quirks. I love the state fair. I love the North Shore. I love the Lake Pepin, and I love the people. And I am very excited to think that there are 10,000 families out there that want to donate their time, their DNA, and their information to science, and to do it for decades, to put Minnesota on the map as being the place to study why some people stay healthy, why some people get sick. And lastly, I'm very excited to think that we're going to build this cohort, this study that reflects the future of Minnesota. Um, and lastly, I'm sort of excited to think that this study is going to outlast my career, or even outlast me. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. My guest has been Dr. Logan Spector, who is an epidemiologist, and he has been talking about the environment, about genes, and of course, lifestyle and how they affect us as a people and affect our health. And just before we go, I just want to let you know that you should mark these down on your calendars. We would be having a second Facebook Live event focusing on COVID-19. You don't want to miss this. It's going to be on focus on COVID-19 testing, and that is going to be we're going to have Bharat Thiagarajan from the 10,000 Family Study team of the University of Minnesota Medical School. The date is going to be August 12th, Wednesday, August 12th, 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I want to thank you again. And just before we go, I would like you, Logan, to give me a number between 1 and 10, and we are going to give out the gift card. I have just been reliably informed that we have the gift card ready, and we're going to announce the winner.
I'm going to go with lucky number 7.
Number 7. And the winner is...
Do you need a drum roll?
Drum roll. Okay, another drum roll. Marisol Asha Doyle. Marisol, thank you very much. You have been a lucky winner today. And of course, we appreciate all of your questions and all of our viewers that called in, that sent in your questions. We do sincerely appreciate you. I cannot thank Dr. Logan Spector enough. Thank you so much for educating us and for informing us. And we want to thank Marilla Jo La Liberte, Heather, Nelson, of course, all of the people, if I haven't mentioned your name, Deanne Lazovic, everyone that joined us. Those that didn't comment, we still appreciate you. My name is Victor Ayara. Special thanks to Clement Wilcox and, of course, Andrea and Emily and Mark, who are working behind the scenes until we come your way with another show, with another Facebook Live event. Stay safe and thank you. Bye.
Thank you.